Hi, my name is Jen Asebrook, and I work at Glacier National Park with a large group of people who have been doing whitebark pine conservation and restoration for nearly 20 years now. We've been sort of going at it since the mid-1990s. And the real purpose of my talk is really, even though we've been doing this for a long time, we're coming across with great successes. But as many of you who are active in the whitebark pine restoration world know, we are still up against a lot of challenges to put this tree, and we work with limber pine too, so I will be presenting some limber pine information as well, to put both of these trees back on the landscape. We, with Kate Kendall's big study in the late 1990s, she really documented in the park what we probably could see visually, that we had a lot of death due to mostly white pine blister rust, and that even by the late 1990s, we knew that about 44% of our original whitebark pine was dead already, with 51 of that whole population of those trees infected, leaving us about 5% of our original whitebark pine that we could see that was not infected by whitebark pine. We did a subsample of that based on some new methodology with Cindy Smith, with Waterton. And so we did far fewer trees, and we found pretty much, very similar trends. We found a lot of dead trees, still a lot of live infected trees. The only reason we probably ended up with a little bit more live, not infected, is that the methods required us to find a certain number of live trees in our plots so that we didn't have to keep extending them over and over again. So I have to admit, we did go to some of Kate's plots that at least did have live trees in them, which is probably why we got a few more live trees in our data. So we don't do blister rust surveys anymore. We know we have a problem. Most of our trees are gone, and we know most of our trees are infected. So we are in the restoration game. We, like I said, have been doing restoration, actual planting since the year 2000. We were doing blister rust surveys and plus tree monitoring prior to that in the 1990s. But from 2000 to 2016, we've done 28 planting events at 18 sites. We've planted over 21,000 whitebark pine trees. We are big on monitoring, so I make a goal of always trying to monitor at least 20% of everything we put out on the ground. So we're right now monitoring over about 4,500 trees. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this burn, non-burned thing. As a park, we have far fewer tricks up our sleeve of what we can do to make good planting habitat. We are very opportunistic in where we plant. We have to wait for a burn. We have to wait for a burn that we can actually hike to because we have so few roads that can get to places. And so for years, despite the fact that we had some good fires in Glacier, we went through many years where we weren't having fires in appropriate habitat. So we've been experimenting, planting in these non-burned areas. Again, for limber, we planted a little bit fewer trees, almost 10,000. We're monitoring about 2,500 trees. We've had far fewer limber habitat burn over that time period, over the last 16 years. So most of our planting sites have been in non-burned areas. And again, just to give you a little bit of data before I go into some of the things that we've been thinking about to maximize our success. Our overall whitebark pine survival from all our plantings has been 62%, which is pretty good. You can see, and I put the dates in there, as time goes on, and I've seen this in a lot of other talks, we are all getting better at this. We had some projects that have only had 10% survival. Sometimes those were in real hot years, drought years. Early on in 2000, we didn't know a lot about microsites. We didn't know a lot about soil type. So sometimes we would plant and it would be a disaster. Obviously, as time has gone on and we've all gone to these meetings and shared our information, we've gotten a lot better and our survival numbers have clearly gone up. You can really see for limber, we have really had a big learning curve. We've had some really awful projects early on. Those were early on, those 2002, 2006, we had major fires in the park. It was really hot, and we're planting really low. Limber is really on the far eastern boundary of the park. So we're in much lower elevations, much drier areas, and just some of the rocky soil we were planting in probably wasn't working. Again, much better in our most recent plantings. Again, we do have a good fire map, GIS capabilities. We had a graduate student that mapped all of actual and potential whitebark habitat in the park. So we have some really nice GIS capabilities of knowing where we want to go to do restoration. Of course, all these talks lead us to more and more data that we should probably be overlapping with this. Getting into then, because we don't have a lot of tricks up our sleeve, there's no daylighting in Glacier National Park. Even doing prescribed burns to make really good habitat for planting is really hard to pull off, especially in high elevations. So like I said, we're very opportunistic about when we can plant and where we can plant. And so we've been trying a little bit of everything to make that success be as best we can. And Kathy, I don't even know if I've shared some of this data with you, but we are finally starting to get some really good data about how we have inoculated some of our seedlings with myccorhizae. This is the Suillus sibericus mushroom, and there is Kathy with her cow vaccinator inoculating our seedlings. And we have actually outplanted several of these in the field. Most of those projects are probably only about 5 years old. But one of my 5-year-old projects that we have had, again, right now nothing is statistically significant, but trend is something that I'm always looking at. And at least 5 years later, and I know talking from just hearing Kathy's talk, that the mycorrhizae isn't really supposed to be about growth, but right now, for our seedlings, and they're planted all in the same plots. So we have circular plots, and they were randomly planted. So their conditions are all the same. Right now, we're seeing bigger growth change in inoculated seedlings than we are in non-inoculated seedlings. This isn't a burn, and we had really high success rate overall. So sometimes that's sort of hard to compare, ironically, when you have really great success no matter what. So we're finding about 87.8 in the inoculated and 95.1% in the non-inoculated. I can tell you some of the death has nothing to do with anything other than a tree falling on our seedling or bark falling on it or a rodent pulling it out of the ground. So this is the difficult thing sometimes about field surveys, field monitoring. We also have another sort of opportunistic study that came along on Divide Mountain. Ironically, a couple people have mentioned this Divide Mountain that's right on the east side of the park, and part of it is on the Blackfeet Reservation. We had a natural fire that burned through there, and we just took advantage of it and planted some seedlings in the burn, some seedlings not in the burn, some seedlings that were inoculated, and some seedlings that were not inoculated. And following data that Kathy just presented, I don't know if I can find the little pointer. Oh yeah. We have found similar to Kathy's that if seedlings were inoculated and planted in a burn, those were the seedlings that had the highest survival. And similarly, seedlings that were not inoculated and not planted in a burn had the lowest survival. When I look at some of the data, at least for now, it's showing a little bit in terms of survival that at least inoculation, and this is a pretty poor soil site, is having more of an impact, a bigger difference in its survival, or at least a higher survival, than just planting in a burn alone. Although the difference, the change in planting versus burn versus inoculating and not inoculating is much greater. Clearly, when we can do both, this is really boosting our survival. Similarly, I just highlighted who is having positive changes in growth and who is having negative changes in growth. And again, mostly highlighting that in these really poor sites, by not planting in a burn and not inoculating them, they're really not doing very well. So that's one thing that we've been really working on is whether inoculating our seedlings seems worth it, and right now our data is sort of pushing us in that direction. Another thing that we've had to be really opportunistic about is planting, is our season of planting. Now, some organizations only plant in the spring. We used to only plant in the fall. And so we've been trying to do a little bit of both to sort of see what works in Glacier, because we're getting a lot of seedlings now, and sometimes we don't even have the staff to completely plant all of those seedlings in one season. It helps us to be able to plant some in the spring and some in the fall. So I've been looking at a couple different things at the same site, where we go to the same place and we plant a bunch of seedlings there in the spring, and then during the same year we plant a bunch of seedlings in the fall. And it's sort of all over the map. I don't really have a great trend right now. Obviously at Flattop Mountain, we had higher survival from our fall plantings. But then at this place, we had slightly lower survival from our fall plantings, and this was about equal. So I guess the good news, and especially as we do some of these older plantings, is that at least we feel we've had enough success in both seasons that we will probably continue to do both and assess our sites by season a little bit more. Similar, this is an older site, and in fact we just visited this Flattop Mountain site just a couple weeks ago. It's one of our older planting sites, and again we did a spring 2001, a fall 2001, and a fall 2002, with again slightly higher, just slightly higher survival for the fall plantings. But again, another really high elevation site, we had much higher survival planting in the spring. So this is just something we're going to continue to look at. And this is summarizing all of our data, whether we planted in the spring or in the fall. And again, whoops. Spring and fall don't really seem to be much different. We had a couple plantings we did sort of late summer trying to jump the gun, and again, clearly learned our lesson on that one. Again, spring and fall for limber pine seem to be about the same, although more recently, we've had better success with planting in the fall. And of course, this probably all ties into just the precip that we get during that season. Again, I said I'd come back to the burned versus non-burned. Without some good fire habitat to plant in, we have had to turn to non-burned sites to try to do some of our plantings. Again, it's really site-specific. There's probably no trend. We've had some projects that didn't go over very well. Although these were our 2 late summer plantings, and that probably had more to do with time of year that we planted than that they were in non-burn sites. But you can see we have been to many places where these are now at least 3 years old, and we're still having excellent success with planting in non-burned areas. Clearly, we can't plant in places that have high vegetation cover. They're usually very much high in elevation where the vegetation is pretty sparse. We are trying to avoid bare grass areas and those sorts of things, but we're able to find plenty of microsites, and the competition does not seem to be overtaking these trees. So some of our recent successes is just that some of our restoration projects are finally getting to be 15 years old. In fact, in the last 2 years, we just monitored 2 of those. This is Grinnell Point, and Rick Yates is here, this infamous Glacier National Park photo that we keep recycling, planting in a very high severe burn on top of Grinnell Point, and we had some members of the re-veg crew go back there last year, and these are the little trees that are there, very wind-swept area, so they're very Krumholtzy, and there's Carlton actually holding the picture of Rick for comparison. And so the good news is we had 65% survival and no trees were detected with blister rust in that planting. So again, for us, this is one of our oldest plantings. So this is getting exciting for us to finally get trees that are of size. I don't know if anyone noticed on my other slide where I was comparing the 5-year-old seedlings. For those of you who don't do whitebark restoration, actual planting, we're talking about 12 centimeter trees at 5 years. These things do not grow fast. Although what we're finding is from year 5 to 10, there's a big growth, and then certainly from 10 to 15, there's significant growth in size. We also just went to Flattop Mountain, one of our sites we planted in 2001, and these are the little seedlings. This is what it looked like when it went in the ground. They're usually 5 or 6 centimeters when they go in the ground. And I probably cut that off. That's actually as tall as Teresa in the ground. So that, I think our tallest tree that we measured, we were just there, was about 175 centimeters. So they're nearing the 2-meter mark. They're putting up multiple stems now. Many of them had 3 to 5 stems. Again, we only had 31% survival over the whole entire project up there. And we did find 5 trees with blister rust. 1 had already died. 1 was actually active on the bowl, and I think the remaining 3 were just on the needles. And we'll see what those do. But all in all, we are seeing that the majority of these trees, at least at 15 years old, I don't really know when we really have to, what point they have to get past to not have blister rust, but at least we're not seeing blister rust in our restoration efforts. And that's mostly it. We're just mostly trying to figure out specific ways to make all of our plantings as successful as possible.